what we're gonna do about the pain. Bring the pain! Okay. And I want audience participation in this one because I would like you to hurt yourself. Just kidding. You're not no audience participation. I'm kidding. How would I track that? Maybe pinch yourself. Okay. So we were talking about pain being multimodal. Multimodal. Let me try that again. Not only is there the physical component, right, the sensory component, which connects it to the cutaneous senses, but an affective and emotional component, right? Because they're affective and emotional are synonymous here. So there's obviously the connection there for what the pain could be. And I mentioned on Monday that pain doesn't necessarily have to be physical to bring about the same kinds of pain. But we are going to focus on this nociceptive pain, right? So these bad boys that are embedded in your skin. So there are various receptors that respond to various impacts on the epidermis, right? And they all go into the spinal cord, and they all go to the brain. So says the direct pathway model, which is that nociceptors receive stimulation, and it sends signals to the brain, regardless of what those signals were, right? And then I said, well, this direct pathway model has some issues with it. Those issues are these 4 issues. Mental state can have an effect. No stimulation on the skin can still elicit pain. A person's attention can change the way pain is felt. And then, of course, the direct pathway model has no explanation for phantom limb pain. Okay? Like, very early on. So you can probably imagine that this, well, let me say it. You can probably imagine that these receptors were discovered, and this model was created before any historical written down account of somebody encountering phantom limb pain. Okay? And then more and more and more happened, and so that led Melzack and Wall back in the 60s, and then they redid a little bit of their theorizing in the 80s to develop what is called the gate control theory, or the gate control model of pain. And so the receptors, yes, do go into a connection called the dorsal root that's on the back end. So if I were a marine mammal, I'd have a dorsal fin on my back. So it's the back part of your spinal cord. They all coalesce into this dorsal root that then goes into the dorsal horn. This is incredibly important because that's where the gate is. Okay? The gate changes, opens or closes. Opens, close, excite, inhibit, on, off. These are all synonymous with the gate. Okay? So the dorsal horn receives information from your nociceptors, your mechanoreceptors, which I talked about in the previous parts. Okay? And then there is this transmission cell. Okay, this big blue one that we're going to talk about. Okay? Oh, sorry, central control is this one right here. Central control changes whether the gate is open or closed. Central control gets information from your brain. Okay? And it says whether or not to open. Now, the gate isn't all stopping. And I'll show you why here, right? So we have signals from the nociceptors, right? They go to the gate cells. but they also go to the transmission cell. So if you have significant amounts of pain, say somebody slices your arm with a knife, right? Giant gash in your arm. No amount of distraction is going to change that. It's going to prevent the gate from being closed on that. I hope that brings it to... So that transmission goes here, but it also goes immediately to transmitting the pain up to the brain. Because you got a huge gash on your arm, right? Somebody sliced your arm. You've got a giant gash on your arm. No gate's going to control that pain. That pain's going to go up no matter what. Okay, but here we're talking about different kinds of pain. Pain that might not be sharp versus pain that could be dull. Okay, and so you have two kinds of fibers. You have thick fibers that are slow in sending information, and they are likely going to get controlled by this gate. Okay, and then you have fast fibers. Those fast fibers basically bypass the gate and go up to the cell. So what kind of pain comes from these two cells? Well, slow cells send dull pain. So whenever you have a headache, for example, or if you have a backache, these are the throbbing, cyclical feelings of pain. And that cyclical feeling of dull pain comes from the fact that the gate is opening and closing. According to this theory, that's what dull pain is doing. The gate is opening and closing, okay? Sharp pain, on the other hand, sharp pain, like getting a stabbing feeling, like stepping on a nail, getting pinched, even something like getting slapped, right? So that's still a fairly sharp pain, right, across the surface of the skin. That gets sent through these fast fibers, and they bypass the gate. Okay, they bypass the gate. And so this gate then accounts for pain perception in somebody who is, their attention is elsewhere. Okay. Or they, excuse me. Or they, aren't thinking about the pain. Or phantom limb pain, for example. The gate control theory does a very good job of explaining how pain is mitigated before it even makes it to your brain. Okay? Why you don't get all of the information. Okay? Now, pain, as influenced by your cognition, those central control process, comes from the top down. Okay? And so expectation plays a role in pain management and pain perception. Okay? You tell a surgical patient what kind of pain they expect to feel both during and after the surgery, then they will actually require and request less pain medication. Okay? This will help them leave the hospital earlier, which is good. Take less morphine, you're able to be clearer, right? Because morphine not only subdues the pain, but it also makes you sleepy and calm, and you're not allowed to operate heavy machinery at that point. So if you are receiving morphine for a gigantic surgery that you have, but you're told, hey, this is the surgery this is what the surgery is going to do, this is how you're going to feel when you wake up, then people will get off the morphine sooner, and that way they get to leave the hospital, because you can't be on morphine and walk out of the hospital. They're not going to let you do that. I've tried. No, just kidding. I haven't tried. I was told to get out of the hospital. If you shift attention I'm going to go into a lot more detail on this in health psych, but if you shift the tension, then you can stop those pain signals in their tracks. So VR has been used. VR and I think AR, augmented reality, is paving the way in pain management. So phantom limb pain used to be handled by using mirrors. And it wasn't super effective. It was helpful, but it wasn't super effective because there was still some belief that the person was looking at their intact arm as opposed to their amputated arm for this particular example. And so the belief / the expectation wasn't really helping. But virtual reality and augmented reality can actually, give that person their arm that can move independently, and therefore you can assess where the pain is, okay? And this way you can then have the person shift their attention, do something distracting, swear words help, okay? Emotions can shift your pain. So emotions, again, are a top-down process. Okay. So there's a really cool technique. If you were around last fall, I think last fall, not this past fall, but the one before that, Peyton Williams did a cold presser task. I don't know. Let me know in chat if you did her task. The cold presser is a really good way to induce pain in somebody's on somebody's skin without like permanently damaging them, right? Because you put protocols in advance, so you can't keep your hand in the ice water for too long. But you get the ice water but between 1 and 5 degrees Celsius. So 0 would be the it's actually going to start freezing. You don't want it to be that cold, but between 1 and 5 degrees Celsius. So pretty friggin' cold. You stick your hand in the ice water bath, and it depends. Generally speaking, what you're measuring is how long a person can keep their hands in there, and you can play around with it. You can modify the experience. And one study that I talk about in health psych is swearing. Okay, so swearing to increase heart rate and endorphins, etc., can potentially reduce the pain perception on a subjective scale, on a self-report scale. Okay, in this particular example from Roy et al. 2008, they listened to music, and so there are 3 conditions. They either were put their hand in the ice bath in silence. They had put their hand in the ice bath during unpleasant music. I wonder if that was like Muzak. You know what I mean by Muzak, right? Elevator music. Awful. It was probably country though. Oh, threw down the gauntlet on unpleasant music. Yeah. You can at me. That's fine. They'll fall on deaf eyes. And then pleasant music in the ice bath. And you can see that intensity is much lower. Much lower when as far as the pain intensity goes and as far as unpleasantness is rated. There was no difference between silence and unpleasant music. I believe they hypothesized that unpleasant music would lead to higher ratings of intensity just because the music itself was unpleasant. But there was no difference. Deaf eyes, Emmeline. Deaf eyes. All right. But I did figure that you were gonna say something. Oh yes, now I have a black can, y'all. Oh, now it's red. It's disappearing. All right. So where does pain go in the brain if it actually makes it past the gate? Several areas. It's green. That's why it's disappearing. See? Can't you tell? It's green. It's green. It's green. Now it's red. Now it's white. So much fun. All right. So most of the pain that gets up to the brain just stays in subcortical areas, which is to say that most of it doesn't go to other regions. It basically stays thalamus, insula, amygdala, hippocampus. The reason why it goes to your amygdala and hippocampus is because you got to learn not to do that again. Imagine sticking your hand on a hot plate, right? The amygdala and the hippocampus are there to tell you not to do that again, right? Not to do that again. There are cortical areas that do get the information. So yeah, your primary somatosensory cortex, which we talked about before when we were talking about touch, that gets the information, especially if the pain occurred on the skin. Okay, because your mechanoreceptors are also going to be active by whatever caused the pain. Okay. The prefrontal cortex is involved because your amygdala and hippocampus are involved. You're creating a memory about what is painful and so what not to do again. Okay. And then the anterior cingulate cortex is also implicated in this because it involves some form of conflict. Again, information. So alarm bells would be ringing because if something is painful, again, you don't want to do it again. Okay, like listening to country music, you know. And so let's talk about a couple of. Do I have a couple of experiments? Yeah. Well, no, I have one. Hoffauer et al. Okay. So participants were presented with potentially painful stimuli and asked to rate subjective pain intensity. And that's one thing that I go into detail in Health Psych is like, why is pain so hard to measure? Well, it's because it's a super subjective experience. And so that's why when most psychologists assess pain, they're actually doing it from a subjective perspective, self-report. There are a number of ways that you can assess subjective pain. One of the more common ways is the Baker-Wong FACES. This is used in hospitals because it is verbal information free. You just ask and especially useful for children who can't really verbalize their pain on a scale from 1 to 10 or 0 to 10, which is also another way to assess pain on an ongoing basis. So both times that Astrid was in labor, they, I think every hour or so while she was in labor, they came and asked her what her pain level was. Maybe more frequent than that, I'm not sure. Oh, cool, yeah, Kerrigan. The Baker-Wong FACES is so good. And it's just faces of it's like 5 different faces, from, like, happy to, like, really, really wincing in pain, like cringy pain, right? And so when you see subjective pain intensity, that's essentially what they're asking. Like on a scale from 0 to 10, like how painful is this to you right now? Okay. And then just like the Roy study that we just talked about with music, they asked them how unpleasant the pain was on a different scale. Okay, probably still 0 to 10, but on a different scale. Okay. So 2 different measurements. Then they place their hand in hot water. Now, hot water you have to be more careful with because hot water can actually start damaging the skin rather quickly. It's not like a cold presser. Okay, a hot presser sucks, and there are more safeguards in place for how long and how hot the water can be. Cannot be scalding. Okay, so if you have a hot water heater and you know what the hot water heater instrument panel looks like, then there are likely letters on it, A, B, C, D, something, and then like maybe a vacation setting or something like that. But those letters correspond to degrees Fahrenheit. And there are standards. I was going to say laws, but that wasn't right. There are standards for what those numbers are and what temperatures do what. So most people keep their hot water heaters at 120 degrees because that's the hottest the water will get when it gets heated up. Because there's a thermostat inside the water tank, and the fire or electricity turns off when it gets to that temperature, right? And it's clearly below boiling, right? Boiling in Fahrenheit is 212 degrees. So 120 degrees, that's close to scalding, if not scalding hot water. So it can damage your hand pretty quickly if you kept it under there, right? 130 is the temperature at which things are sanitized. So, you know, and then beyond that, you're entering the realm of like this is damaging. Jacob asks, why would you use hot water instead of cold water? Because it's you have receptors for both, right? Hot water can also stand as a proxy for fire and other hot things. So cold water cannot be a proxy for fire. Even though when something is really cold or really hot, the sensation is the same, right? So if you've ever picked up some dry ice before with some bare hands, raise your hand if you have. I have. It is unpleasant, and I immediately dropped it. But it is so cold that it just feels like it's burning, right? So it's just another set of... You just have to be more careful with it, Jacob. That's all. That's all. These folks were. They were careful. They didn't harm their participants. And the participants agreed to stick their hand in hot water. Okay? And so they also had... I believe this is FMRI. And so they stuck their hand while they were laying down in the tube. And so... The other layer to this, and I think this is kind of fun, from my perspective, is that they tried to use hypnosis to increase or decrease sensory, so attention, and emotional components to modulation. And what they found was that the suggestions from the hypnotist changed subjective intensity, and those changes in subjective intensity corresponded to changes of activity in the somatosensory cortex, which is the blue area shaded. It's like, what? So you could tell, and these people had to be highly suggestible for the hypnosis to actually work. So if they suggested, you know, this hot water isn't that hot, then the somatosensory cortex, so subjective pain rating went down, and activity in S1 also went down. Say that if you suggest to them that this is really hot water, then subjective pain ratings went up, and so did activity in S1. Okay? Which is pretty cool. Pretty cool. As far as how valid how valid findings can be with respect to hypnosis, of course, right? And then the other thing that they found was that unpleasantness was independent of subjective pain, right? So something could be... So the idea behind that, and this, of course, is an individual difference, but the idea behind the fact that these two are, like, orthogonal ratings is that something can hurt a lot, and not necessarily be unpleasant, or something can be unpleasant and not necessarily hurt a lot. So for the latter one, for the second one that I just said, I think one that I could use to describe that one would be like an earache, a dull earache. So maybe you have an ear infection, but the ache isn't like it's like somebody stabbing you in the ear. It's just a dull ache, right? Because it's in your ear, it's unpleasant. Maybe you would rate that as highly unpleasant. But since it's a dull ache, it's probably not all that painful, if that makes sense. Now, I'm trying to think of an example, and maybe if in chat you think of an example of the former, something is not painful but really unpleasant. Not super painful, but really, like, it's not super intense. Oh, wait, no, I'm sorry, I just did that one. It's not unpleasant, but it's super painful, which sounds weird. I'm trying to think of, it's not unpleasant, but it's highly painful. I don't know. I mean, it can exist. A second degree burn. Painful, but not unpleasant. I don't know about that. Carrying large, awkward items. I mean, maybe. I want to think about that one. I have to think about that one. Okay, so Katerina, injured foot and couldn't stand on it because it caused intense pain, but it wasn't unpleasant because if I wasn't on it, I didn't notice. Maybe. Oh, no, I like Anya's. Oh, yes, that one's great. I like Anya's, since we're talking about physical pain. Yeah, Golden Duke, we're talking about physical pain on this for this one, so that's more of an emotional pain. It's a big bummer though. Especially for people these days. But I like Anya's. Getting a piercing or a tattoo because you want it. So it's not unpleasant because you are anticipating the positive effect afterward. I like that one. Or pain from working out. Yeah, Emlyn, I like that one too. Okay, cool. I'm gonna steal those, guys. Thanks. Appreciate it. So just to end this point, the unpleasantness activity was in the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex. So the orthogonality of unpleasant versus subjective ratings of pain, that was occurring here, because you would say, this does not feel unpleasant. This is very unpleasant. So that, again, suggestion. So that's the hypnosis, right? So orthogonal pleasantness versus... they match up a lot. Right? Things that are painful or unpleasant. Things that are not painful aren't necessarily unpleasant or pleasant. They're maybe benign in that way, but in this case, they are orthogonal ratings. They are different independent ratings. Okay. The other study that I want to talk about is from Singer and co-workers. It's how your book presents so Singer and co-authors wanted to demonstrate empathy using FMRI, and what they had their participants do is watch other people in pain. Watch other people receive painful stimuli, and then they wanted to see what brain areas were active. Okay, so this first brain on the left, is what was active when they received painful stimulation. Did I write down what it was? No. I think it was maybe minor shocks. I'm not entirely sure. I should write that stuff down sometimes. But anyways, this is the brain areas that were active. So you have the somatosensory cortex, and you have the infratemporal cortex, some areas here. This is angular gyrus, Wernicke's areas, stuff that was active here. The important part about this one, though, is the perception part, okay? The perception part. And the perception of others, because you can see that this area is active right here. So this part is implicated in theory of mind, as well as empathy. And so this is where the partner was shown the pain. And you can see that essentially the same areas were active, okay? Doesn't activate the somatosensory cortex. So you don't actually feel their pain, but you feel their pain, right? So that's what empathy would necessarily mean. You don't literally feel their pain, because otherwise this area would be active, right? But you feel their pain, because you understand the pain that is going through them, because maybe you've experienced previously, right? And that's what we mean by empathy, right? Putting yourselves in the shoes of others, okay? No, it's just another person, Golden Duke, just another person. So they put people together in pairs, basically. Okay. Other areas that were implicated but aren't on this image, the insula and the anterior cingulate cortex as well. Watching somebody get hurt. And then also Klimecki and coworkers this isn't a direct replication, but they were also studying empathy. And they found that if you do empathy training with folks, then people are more likely to understand what other people are going through, especially when you talk about physical pain. Okay. So empathy training, going through psychological empathy training, explaining to people how empathy works, what empathy is. Emmeline asks, do you think the response is different if the two people were related? Because you care about them more? Maybe you would see stronger activation here in this area that is highlighted, as well as the insula and the DACC. But regardless, it's not going to activate the somatosensory cortex. Even if you have literally felt that pain before. It's because you're not actually feeling it when you're watching it. So imagine these are more like mirror neurons than anything, as opposed to the physical sensation. The somatosensory cortex is only going to be active if you are actually feeling the physical pain. But I would say that if you cared about that person more, then you would likely see increased activation to the average. And the average, we could say, is a baseline measure for strangers. But that's a good question. That's a good question. I think I have one more thing. Yeah, this is the last thing. And this is more of a social pain kind of thing. So moving away from physical pain for a second, because I wanted to talk about it. I go way more into social pain stuff for health psych, so that's starting on Friday for those folks. And so if you are not in that class and you want to learn more about pain, come by at 11. Excuse me. So I mentioned that social pain activates the same areas, so to speak, that physical pain does. And that's why the direct pathway model doesn't explain social pain. And so this particular study by Eisenberger, not our lovely political scientist at Eureka, this is a different person. Eisenberger and colleagues asked the question, does rejection hurt? And it's a cute little FMRI study that I wanted to share with you because of the game that they made, which is called Cyberball. And so you in the salmon color there, you see the cyberball. Okay. So cyberball is a game where you pass a ball back and forth with your avatars. While you're in the bore of the FMRI, right? So they're taking a snapshot, as you can see here, taking some snapshots. And there are two conditions that you play during it: trial after trial after trial, switching back and forth on whether you include this third player, which is you, okay, or excluding the third player, which is you. Okay, so that's why this represents your hand here in the avatar thing, right? So when it includes you, every so often, you get past the ball either by the one on the right or the one on the left, and then you pass it back to one on the right or the one on the left. Okay, that's one trial. Okay, and then a trial where you're excluded, they actually go back and forth. And so that would be one trial, is them going back and forth and you not getting the ball. Okay. And so this is divided into 2 sessions. You do this session first, and then you do this session second. Okay. And they measured the difference in activation of the DACC, dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, this area here. They measured the difference, so they compared the different activations. And what they found was that during times of distress, this one, social distress, your DACC is very active. During times of non-social distress, your DACC is not really active. So you see how rejection and or social pain, however you wanna deal with that social pain, whether you consider a rejection or not, there we go. Whether you consider it social pain or not, you're still going to have activation of rejection in that area, which mimics when the DACC is active when you're getting physically harmed. Okay. So that's all I have for pain. Any questions regarding pain? No pain, no gain. Let me know in chat. I'm going to end the recording here.